Hello everyone, my name's Saj Huq, I'm Director of Innovation at Plexal. Welcome to Cyber Lates, our quarterly meetup for our burgeoning cyber community. We're delighted to have you all here in person. This is our second meetup, following a hot on the heels of the successful inaugural one back in July. And tonight's one we're really pleased to be delivering it in partnership with Tech London Advocates and Global Tech Advocates, whom we're delighted to be playing a role in co-chairing the cybersecurity network, which you will hear quite a lot about tonight. So just in terms of Plexal, for those of you who are new here, we're the innovation company that's on a mission to build the UK's most connected cybersecurity ecosystem. That involves physical operations here in London, Cheltenham and Manchester. And our community, as I mentioned, is burgeoning and growing. Specifically this week, we've grown that by over 100 startups whom we've just welcomed to our most recent program, Cyber Runway. And I know a number of our cohort members are here tonight, so thank you for coming and welcome to the community. So tonight, we're going to talk about pilots and the role of pilots in a startup sales strategy, hear from a couple of our cybersecurity members on how pilots have been quite transformational for them in terms of going to market. This is intended to be an interactive session, so do feel free to raise your hand if you have questions. We'll be coming to you in the audience at various points during the evening to hear your inputs as well. But before that, I just wanted to introduce a number of my colleagues and partners whom I mentioned we're delivering this event in partnership with. So we'll be kicking off the evening shortly with a fireside chat with Russ Shaw, the founder of Tech London Advocates and Global Tech Advocates, who will join us on stage very shortly. But firstly, I just wanted to introduce Steve Berry, Executive Chairman of Angoka and my fellow co-chair of the Tech London Advocates Cybersecurity Network. Steve, welcome.
Thanks very much for coming. I have to admit that because of the pandemic and COVID, we've been a little bit dormant, and I got a call from Ross saying, what's going on? And I said, well, we need to get other people involved. But I follow in the footsteps of somebody that's quite well known, Jennifer Quarrie, who some of you probably know from the press. She was the original founder of the TLA cyber unit. But, and then I've taken that over. So lovely to think that we've got some relationships now with Lorca, so we can expand in terms of the activities that we've been involved with. So I've been in the cyber industry for probably close to 15 years now. And wonderful thing about cyber, of course, is that it's a horizontal. It actually has an impact on every single one of the TLA cohorts, sectors, if you will. And when I have my meetings with captains of industry, if you will, the two words that come up today in terms of risk is cyber and climate change. And they go hand in hand in some respects. And interesting enough, some of the technology is applicable between the two. But so cyber being horizontal, but it's also a very interesting industry in the sense that tens of billions is spent every year by governments and organizations on cybersecurity. And yet, even with that type of expenditure, every week we hear about another major hack, and probably tens of thousands of unreported hacks every single day, if you will. So it's unusual to be involved with an industry where so much money is being spent, so many companies are being created, some of them we're going to hear about from tonight, and yet the cyber threat still persists. So what that suggests is that plenty of opportunities as individuals in the room, but also in terms of new companies coming along. But we have a long way to go before we can resolve and put the cybersecurity and the threats that are attached to that to bed. So I welcome the fact that we have this initiative tonight. So I want to announce a third co-chair, Diane Gilbert. Please stand up. So there's obviously a reason for that. We need more bodies to be involved with the TLA cyber because there's obviously a lot of work to be done in terms of the initiatives that we're involved with. So thank you very much. Enjoy the evening.
Thanks, Steve. So I mentioned we're delivering this event in partnership with Tech London Advocates and Global Tech Advocates. And the person behind that, the founder, is Russ Shaw, CBE. Russ is a very good friend of Plexal, a long-term partner of ours, I'm delighted to welcome you up on stage to tell us more about TLA.
I think I have to sit there because my mic is here. Great. Hi, everyone.
Thanks for joining us, Russ.
Yeah, pleasure. Pleasure to be here.
And so firstly, for obviously our new members of the audience, can you tell us a little bit about Tech London Advocates and Global Tech Advocates?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And bear with me. I've been at Web Summit for the past 3 days. I haven't had much sleep, so and the voice is going, so if I sound a bit croaky. But Tech London Advocates is a community that I set up nearly 9 years ago to do two things. One, to promote and support the startups and scale-ups that were and have been emerging in London's tech ecosystem. And two, to be a voice from a grassroots point of view for the issues and challenges that we face as we try and grow and build London and the UK into a world-leading tech ecosystem. The group is literally made up of volunteers. Everybody in the community is a volunteer, and I do all of this pro bono as my give back to tech. So I ask advocates to do 3 things. One, use this as a resource when you're speaking, tweeting, blogging about all things tech, and to try and speak with a relatively consistent voice when we're speaking to media, government, and key influencers. 2, the group is open, inclusive, free to join. Anybody can become an advocate. And for those of you in the room who are not in the community, you're very welcome to join. I just need your contact details, and we'll bring you into the community and bring you into our TLA cyber group. I just ask every advocate to introduce at least one new advocate to the community when ready to do so. So we're a group that grows through network effects, and we're just coming up to 13,000 Tech London advocates here in London, across the UK, and actually in 70 countries around the world. And these are founders, entrepreneurs, CTOs, investors, corporates, universities, students, teachers, you name it. Anybody who's interested in tech is welcome to be in the group. And then 3, I ask everybody to adopt the ethos, which is we're here to help one another for the greater good. So if an advocate reaches out and says, do you know so-and-so? Can you connect me? Do you think you could help me with this or make an introduction? Either say yes or say, look, no, sorry, I can't. Maybe I can find somebody who can. So very much designed for busy people. It's not a big ask. For those who want to do more and get more involved, we have, in the London group, we have over 40 working groups, including the TLA cyber group. We've got groups focused on women in tech, education, immigration. Last week, our Black Women in Tech group, which numbers over 1,600, launched a book called The Voices in the Shadow, which features 51 Black women in UK tech. It was just an amazing event. We've got groups representing various verticals: fintech, blockchain, insurtech, creative tech, health tech, ed tech, you name it. And then we have groups that connect London to other parts of the world. So we've got a TLA Africa group. We've got a TLA China group. We've got some chapters in the US. In fact, I was in Phoenix 3 weeks ago. We launched a TLA Arizona chapter, and the mayor of Phoenix is actually here in London tomorrow to talk about how do we better connect what's going on in London with Phoenix. And then on the Global Tech Advocate side, we've taken this volunteer-driven model, and I had no idea when I set up this group that it would have resonance around the world. And we've replicated what we're doing here in 21 other tech hubs around the world. So the first group that we set up was Tech Nordic Advocates. So I licensed the brand, the IP, and the operating principles for a whopping £1 a year. So it's not about making money, but there's a proper 20-page commercial agreement put in place. We get the logos done, the branding trademarked, and we help these groups set up their networks in their communities around the world. So we've got 5 groups now in the UK, London, north of England, Belfast, Scotland, and Wales. The Wales group launched this summer. Actually, yesterday in Glasgow at COP26, Tech Scotland Advocates was broadcasting live from the Green Zone. We've got groups across Europe, across the Americas, and we've got many groups in Asia, in China, Japan, Australia, Singapore. India is in soft launch and formally launching early next month. So this group keeps growing and expanding. We've got probably 25,000 advocates all around the world. For those of you who are not in the group, you'll get a welcome email from me. I send out newsletters every 6 to 8 weeks about what's going on, both in London and globally. We've got websites for both TLA and GTA. We have an online magazine called GTA Connects, which is featuring voices and leaders from our Global Tech Advocates community around the world. That's on gtaconnects.org. But again, that will all be in your welcome email. So sorry, it was a bit lengthy, but hopefully you all now have a better understanding of what these groups are about.
Thank you, Russ. And it would be remiss of me to not say that, those of you in the Plexal cyber community, there's obviously lots of opportunity to get involved. So if you do want to get involved, do reach out to myself, Diane, or Steve, and we'd be happy to link you in effectively. So Russ,
yes,
you're a major voice for the UK tech ecosystem. What excites you the most about the UK's tech ecosystem and then cybersecurity within that at the moment?
I think broadly about the tech ecosystem, we've gone through this incredible transformation from, say, 10 years ago, from fledgling startups in Shoreditch to now being recognized as probably the world's third tech ecosystem alongside the US and China, which I think India is closely following behind. But in a relatively short amount of time to have over 100 tech unicorns, tens of billions being invested in UK tech every year, and now the government absolutely embracing what's going on. In fact, I was in this room in September. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, spent a whole afternoon here with 20 of us from the tech sector, and he was remarkable. For 5 hours, he spoke, he moderated panels, he took questions, and he kept saying, ask me tough questions, but he's really embracing the UK tech sector. So I think there's a lot of great momentum. We're not without our issues and challenges, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And then in terms of the cyber sector, I think for me, the cybersecurity sector is a key driver and key underpinning as to why we have such a vibrant tech ecosystem in the UK. If you look at the money that's gone into cyber, it's just off the scale. I think it's now over £4 billion in terms of the UK economy. Last year, over £800 million went into cyber investment in the UK. So it's really, really substantial. And then, you look a few months ago, Darktrace, a multi-billion dollar IPO on the London Stock Exchange, to me is a crowning example of where we're going with cyber and how we're building this. So really exciting time, I think. And for those of you in the room, what you're doing, the cyber runway cohorts, et cetera, you are our future in terms of really positioning the UK as a world-leading tech nation.
And how do you think cybersecurity relates to, as well as differs from, the rest of the technology sector?
I think there are some similarities in terms of the money that's coming in, how cyber, and I think Steve shared this very well earlier. Cyber stands on its own, but for me, cyber also interconnects with fintech and blockchain and health tech and med tech. It kind of cuts across all of the tech verticals, which we have to remind people of, and it also, we want to focus it on as a discrete tech vertical. So that's really key. I think there's also a lot of challenges that we face with cyber that are also running across the tech sector. For me, the number one challenge that we face is around talent and diversity in our sector. And I think the cyber sector has that challenge, but so do many other tech verticals. So I think there's a lot of things where we can collaborate across the broader tech ecosystem, but to really put the spotlight on cyber as one of the real underpinnings of what we're trying to do, which is why I'm glad that you and Steve and Diane are coming together. How do we really give this a boost from a grassroots point of view?
Yeah, brilliant. And I was going to ask you about cyber's biggest challenge. I completely concur that talent is a strategic challenge that we need to overcome. Actually, on our cyber runway cohort, we've been specifically trying to target and include underrepresented communities on our program. We're delighted to have the largest cohort ever of female-led businesses in cybersecurity who have been through a government-backed program, as well as BAME-led and BAME senior management representatives on that program as well, which is great. But there's obviously a lot more work to be done. So I completely agree. I mean, do you think, I guess just building on the challenge aspect, do you think sometimes cybersecurity seen as overly niche, maybe, in the tech sector? Is it seen as complicated and too technical?
I think maybe that might have been true a few years ago, but I think now, given how cyber and cybersecurity really is touching everything, and not just in the tech world, but for many of the non-tech businesses that are out there, when you look at the hacking that's going on, the infiltration, et cetera, we have a massive job to do to educate the broader market and many businesses, not just large businesses, but so many small and mid-sized businesses about why cybersecurity is so critical to make things happen. And people are getting hacked all the time. There's so much at risk here that I do think this is something that has really gone mainstream. And sometimes it's moved to the mainstream because of the negative experiences, the crimes that have happened. But the flip side is that through those misfortunes, I think many people have stepped up and said, we really need to embrace this. And I think, for many of you in the room, I think one of the big priorities here is how do you make it accessible? I deal with this, whenever I'm introduced to somebody as a tech person, and I'm a non-techie, but people, I'm introduced as this person from Tech London Advocates and Global Tech Advocates, and people who are not familiar with tech just take a step back, or they say, I just don't know that whole space at all. But when in reality, many people do. Well, through the smartphones that they have, through surfing the web, this is an accessible sector. We have to make the language and the way we present this and the people that we bring into the sector, we have to keep making it as accessible as we can be. So oftentimes I'll be in events and somebody will just say some phrase, some expression, my hand goes up and say, but what does that mean? How do you explain that to your average punter on the street who would probably get it if you just use some basic language? Or how do we showcase people who are doing really interesting things? I think Darktrace for me has been a very interesting story, and I think Poppy Gustafsson, who leads that, has done a really good job explaining to the broader population about who they are, what they do, and why this is so important. And I think we all have to take a page from her book and really learn from that.
I completely agree. And, so Russ, final question. I mean, what excites you the most about the role of startups in the post-pandemic world, hopefully?
I think we've gone through a crazy 18 months or 2 years, and a year and a half ago, I was really, in particular, worried about the early stage startups who were running out of cash. And we lost some early stage startups over the past 12 to 18 months. It was great to see the Chancellor step up last year and put a fund in place to help many businesses who didn't have good investors behind them to get the funding. So what I'm really excited about is, one, the funding continues to flow in to cyber and UK cyber. Two, we continue to build really great startups to become scale-ups, to become tech unicorns in the cyberspace. I love Cyber Runway and what you're doing, and the cohorts that you're bringing in, and the diversity that you're bringing in. To me, that is the whole next wave of where this is going. We're going to have many more cyber challenges, hackings that are going to go on, big organizations. I look what's happened in the U.S., when gas pipelines have been, brought to their knees. People are looking at this and saying, what are the solutions here? And, what excites me is the solutions are in this room through the many businesses that are going to be supported here. Our role at TLA and through TLA Cyber is we want to give you a voice, we want to give you a platform, and we want to help you to project what you're doing to the broader population so that you can grow your business, investors continue to be excited, the media takes an interest, and people look at what you're doing and saying, wow, that is really first class, we need to keep doing that.
Brilliant. Russ, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and I look forward to the rest of the session. Thanks.
Yep, thank you very
everyone.
much.
And please, if you can, give me your details before you leave. I've got business cards. Come on into the community. You're more than welcome. We want to make you all Tech London advocates. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Talking about startups to talking to startups, I'm delighted to introduce two of our members of our recent cohorts, Haydn Brooks and Simeon Quarrie. Please come on stage. Hey.
How's it going, Saj?
Yeah, good. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Hello.
So Haydn, can you tell us a little bit, before we kick off, can you just tell us a little bit about Risk Ledger and what you guys do?
Yeah, happy to. So Haydn Brooks, co-founder of Risk Ledger, founded the company back in April 2018. We're a supply chain security company, and we're building a social network collaborative platform to help companies understand the risk in their supply chain. And we do it in quite a unique way compared to how people have previously done it. So in 3.5 years, we've raised about 3.4 million now, 18 people growing to 25. We've got about 40 enterprise clients and about 1,400 suppliers on the platform. So yeah, going well.
Brilliant, thank you. And Simeon, can you tell us a little bit about VIVIDA?
So we essentially founded on storytelling, and we use interactivity and storytelling to educate people within large enterprises how to minimize their security risk. We've come from virtual reality to then doing it interactively using online media, including our newly launched kind of cyber online escape room.
Oh, brilliant. And
we're bootstrapped, so it's very different. So we are smaller than yourselves. Currently, we're about 8 of us, and we haven't gone down the funding route, so it's a bit of a different perspective.
I'm very jealous.
I'm jealous.
Great. No, well, obviously we're here to talk about pilots, and but Haydn, you mentioned that you guys have raised a bit of investment. I know you've acquired quite a few customers in the last 12 months. Can you just tell us a little bit about how pilots have formed part of your sales strategy?
Yeah, so they've evolved, I'd say, over the whole kind of 2.5 years we've been in the market. So at the very start, we actually didn't have a product. So when my co-founder and I started the business, we had no cash and needed to raise some investment. And in order to raise that investment, we managed to sell 2 pilots without a product to 2 separate companies. And there, the pilot was kind of a big project document. It was like a 3-month paid-for pilot to prove that there was a market there to then raise the investment. And then very quickly, when we had raised the investment and built the platform, realized that if you approach a client, if a client asks for a demo or a trial or a proof of concept, and you approach them with kind of a 4 or 5 page project document, they think it's going to require a lot of work to then get through it. So we massively scaled that down, and now our pilots are kind of 2 weeks, sign the client up, let them play around on the platform for 2 weeks, and we set very clear kind of objectives and very clear milestones and things that we want to show in that 2-week period. Yeah, and we use it almost as a way to justify the business case. So we think of a sale, a company will buy you if there is a business case there to buy you. So it's quite a nice way there to prove the business case that we previously would have written for the client and kind of showed them. So it adds kind of credence to the sales process.
I'll come back to, you talked about that trimming down really of the pilot period, and I'll come back to asking you for some specifics in terms of how that's translated to sales, if that's okay.
You basically did the entire half an hour in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't want to give it all away now yet. So, but Simeon, we were talking about this earlier about pilots, and it has also played a role in VIVIDA's kind of go-to-market strategy as well. Can you tell us a bit about your experiences?
So for us, we had a bit of an agency-style model. We were like these creative ninjas that large organizations would use to create highly engaging content that would take something that was boring, difficult to understand, and make it simple and really engaging. So the idea of a pilot or proof of concept was something that was really totally foreign to us. If an organization came and said, we want you to do a bit of work for almost free, we were like, there's absolutely no way. But now as we started to build out product and a different type of offering, pilots became really important, particularly when we started to work with virtual reality. The first thing we ended up needing to do was actually a proof of concept, and there is a difference there. We would have a new way of doing things where what we wanted to do, for example, for Lloyds, who've been very connected with the London office of Rapid Cyber Advance. So what they ended up doing was going, actually, look, this looks really good, but we want to prove out the concept related to virtual reality and whether people would engage with it and whether they would learn well. So it was a proof of concept that we needed to do because people didn't really understand fully. The concept was quite foreign. We needed to prove the concept. And so we went down that route. And then now we start to work a little bit more on the pilot side of things, which is a little bit different. You're not really proving out the concept, but you're kind of now starting to prove whether it makes sense for the business by giving them just a nibble, giving them just a taster.
Interesting. I mean, I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about the Lloyds example that you gave, but just coming back to what you said earlier, Haydn, about trimming down the pilots, did you see that translate into more sales as a result?
Yeah, much more engaged sales process, much quicker sales process, and quicker to close contracts as well. I will say it's not kind of a one-size-fits-all, so it's a bit of a puzzle piece. It depends on the specific client and what they want to get out of the trial, or the proof of value, or the proof of concept. So we have some clients who want a 3-month kind of trial, in which case we'll ask for it to be paid, and we'll only do kind of free trials if they are short and something that we can just bash out in 2 weeks. Yeah. So we tend to fit it around the specific client and what they're trying to get out of it to be able to prove the business case kind of internally.
Is our pilot sometimes just a synonym for getting something for free? How do you avoid that?
Yeah, I'd say qualify the client well. So if at any point in the sales process we think the client is just trying to get some free value out of us, then we'll call it out. And we do keep an eye on them when they're on the trial, 1, to make sure they're being successful with it, and 2, to make sure they're not just kind of walking off with free data out of our platform. But yeah, that's something you do have to be careful of, but that comes with the qualification in the client. Like, you would only ever run a trial. A trial's it's kind of like the second last stage in the sales process before kind of the negotiation and closing. And at that point, usually we've identified a need, we know they have budget, we know that there's a use case for them to use it within their company. And at that point, it's pretty much a done deal. It's just proving that actually it is the right product for them.
Yeah. And Simeon, you mentioned the Lloyds Banking Group example. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that particular project?
Yeah.
I mean, how long was it? How did it come about?
So they had a specific business need. They wanted to try and find ways of engaging colleagues within the business on the subject of cybersecurity. They had done some proof of concepts around virtual reality, and it had gone well, but there'd been nothing in the cyberspace. And here we were with a VR experience. So what we ended up doing, firstly, they had us do an engagement whereby we would turn up for half a day, and we would run a number of their team through a virtual reality experience. It was something that was paid for. We made sure of that. Then what we ended up making sure that we were able to do is we had people from different parts of the business try it. And so we had senior leadership, middle management, retail, different types of individuals, and then they were essentially almost taking notes of people's reactions. And we did a couple of those. And then after that, then all of a sudden, then we got a much larger project as a result. But when it comes to looking at doing a pilot, the key question for me is why? Why are you doing it? So when it comes to something like virtual reality, businesses want something that's glitzy and glamorous, right? They want to show innovation. And for sometimes success looks like having something glitz and glamour, turning up for a day and advertising it internally. That's the equivalent for us of a paid engagement, of a paid service. So I would always want to understand why it needs to be done. And there needs to be a really core sense of, a real purpose. It's almost like you are investing. And you don't just throw money around, right, with an investment. You think about it. Okay, so if I do this, what's going to come afterwards? Are you on a first date that's going to lead to a longer relationship? Or are you really after something that's much more frivolous and short-term, if you get my drift? And so that's, in essence, what we start to then try and make sure of, because we're interested in longer relationships. And the pilot really should be a first date or a second date, and ideally you need to know what is it that they're looking for. What does a good match look like? What type of personality? Do you want kids? Sorry, I didn't mean to look at you there. Do you want kids? What are your aims and your aspirations? And some of those questions you may ask in that first date, or actually it might be the bit that comes off the dating profile, right? There may actually be enough information on that dating profile to even work out whether that first date makes sense. I'm really sorry about the dating analogy.
That's brilliant.
Giving you an idea what's going on behind the scenes.
Not following on with the same analogy, but some of our most successful clients are ones that we've actually said no to a trial with. So we've turned down the trial, and then that kind of makes them want to buy the platform more, weirdly.
Yes.
Why have you said no to Sure.
Because they wanted 3 or 4 months without paying for it. And at that point, it's kind of like, well, we've got to invest kind of 4 months of our team's time into setting up and running a trial for you to get some value out of it. And if you're not going to kind of pay for that, then we're not going to commit to it.
Yeah. There you go as well, by the way, 2 for 1. You heard a little bit about Simeon's dating strategy as well as his go-to-market strategy as well. But I know you've obviously executed some successful large-scale pilots, one of which was with NHS Test and Trace, who is now a client.
Yep.
Can you just tell us a little bit about that particular project and maybe how it's differed from previous pilots that you've run?
Yeah, so that was a 4-week pilot, if I remember correctly. It was run by my sales director. We engaged them quite early on. There was a clear kind of need, clear business case for the platform. But because they were choosing a startup over more established platforms, they had to kind of justify internally why that was the case. And so we signed them up. Our platform's a bit unique in that we can sign a client up in 5 minutes and have them start connecting with suppliers that are already on our platform within 10 minutes. So they're like immediately getting kind of value from it. And within the 4 weeks, we managed to show kind of a huge decrease in the amount of time it takes them to understand their supplier's security, a huge decrease in their kind of procurement cycle length as well. And within the 4 weeks, they wanted the platform. So it's quite
I mean,
good.
it must have been, some of us in this room know the perils of sometimes working with government. That must have been a difficult organisation to work with.
It was surprisingly, they described themselves as the most well-funded greenfield startup that ever existed, because I think it was 20 billion or something kind of got handed to them, and they just had to build everything up from the start.
Okay.
So it was relatively easy to work with them, and there was a clear need straight away. So we've got quite a few good case studies where we've identified problems in the supply chain that could have led to actual incidents. And there was a clear need for them to be able to identify those problems before they actually happen, because it would have a real-world impact on their ability to perform testing. So yeah, that was a really quite nice case study for us in terms of running a trial, making sure it was effective, keeping it short, keeping it kind of aimed at getting value out of there and showing it back to the client.
Bro, I mean, Simeon, you talked a little bit about, sometimes, how you really need to understand the motivation for a pilot from the buyer perspective. Can you elaborate a little bit on maybe some mistakes that you've made along the way in terms of getting to that realisation?
Yeah, I think that the key thing is understanding in that why, what could those possible whys be? Sometimes you're dealing with, quite bluntly, a member of the organisation that doesn't have the buying power, right, in order to be able to introduce your product. And what they need to do is they need to be able to lay out, as Haydn said, a clear business case, because they need to be able to define the value. So they might look at something. For us, it's really easy to get swept up with the dark web mission control center, which is all sound effects and animation. It's really easy. We design it in a way that gets you emotionally engaged. But if you take away that, what does the product actually do? And so what ends up happening is often a lot of buyers within large organizations, as it moves into procurement, they don't buy with emotion. Now, for us, we deliver and try and engage people emotionally. So what happens is often what they're trying to do is that they need to be able to present a business case whereby they strip away the emotion and they deliver hard facts, benefits, numbers, maybe figures, etc. And so with a pilot or proof of value, you're able to then actually almost get to something that's pretty much written. So if someone doesn't see something, doesn't experience it, introducing the product and going through procurement makes real sense. And so that's something, for example, I look for. The aim, of course, for us is to get to a sale and to get to a happy client that's going to stay with us over a long period of time. And I want to be able to do that in the shortest way possible. If I don't need to do it with a pilot, I'm not doing it with a pilot, right? Don't make the mistake of thinking that actually the aim here is constantly just to go after pilots, because it can be a dangerous thing for the business. But if you understand actually that the pilot here could be the bridge, the stepping stone, to allow them to get from one side to the other, then it starts to make sense.
We never offer a pilot, so we only ever run one if the client asks for it.
Yeah.
We would never offer it up front. Yeah.
That's key.
Yeah. I was going to ask, actually, obviously you've got multiple customers now. Has the frequency of offering pilots decreased as you've scaled up?
I'd say it's actually increased recently. So 90% of the time, the client will always ask for a trial or a proof of value. There's very few deals now where they don't I don't know why that is. The other thing I would add to running a trial, we actually use it as a time to learn about the customer as well. So because it's such a high-touch environment where we're kind of meeting with them every week, finding out how they're using the platform, we actually learn quite a lot about them as a client, what's going to make them happy over the course of the contract, and we kind of feed all of that data into then our quarterly business reviews with that client. So they can be quite useful tools for us, but they do slow down the sales cycle. So yeah, we don't offer it up front. But it's rare now for an enterprise to buy a product, I'd say, without asking for a trial.
Yeah. Haydn, you mentioned that RiskLedger's raised over £3 million, including an announced round this week of 2.1 million.
Yep.
Well done.
Thank you.
Congratulations. In terms of, obviously, investors are always looking for demand and appetite from the market for a particular product. Were pilots a factor in that, or was it just pure revenue and revenue growth that they were looking at?
I'd say it depends on the stage you're at. For the most recent round we did, pilots weren't a huge factor. Some investors will sit down and want to go through the pilots and work out, okay, are the pilots repeatable? Like, how short are they? And they'll kind of assess the suitability of the pilots. But no, that didn't really factor into, I don't think, the investment decision that was made recently. Whereas at the very start, when we had like no customers and we had a few customers on trial, they wanted to know everything about the trials. Are the trials going to close? How quickly will they close? How big will the contract be off the back of it? So it really does depend on kind of the stage you're at and the type of investor as well.
Yeah, and I guess similar but slightly different question to you, Simeon, obviously noting that you haven't taken investment, but the pilots, are they an indication for demand for particular verticals? Have you seen, because I know you're offering your product across different verticals, have you seen some industries be more,
Yeah, I think that, again, it depends on the why. If it's because they're wondering whether the technology is going to marry with their own technology, if a client is maybe potentially trying to minimize risk, can be another reason. They may see that there might be a risk whether something integrates, and so they can jump over that hurdle. We've tried to reduce pilots, but now we've created a product where pilots become easier. For example, with our online escape room, it's much easier than us turning up on a location with VR headsets, right? We can activate it, and we can run a session really easily in the course of within a day or two. But we're very cautious about slowing down the sales cycle.
Yeah.
We did have a government organisation that went through part of the escape room just in 20 minutes. It takes an hour. So we were put on the spot. So we did a meeting. The aim of the meeting was to try and see if we could get a pilot or a POC. And we knew that. We ran through part of the escape room just under pressure because they said, "Oh, do you mind just setting up one now?" So, okay, we set it up. And then we ran through just 20 minutes and partway through, pulled the plug. Said, "Really sorry, meeting's got to end in 5 minutes, let's chat." And in that moment, they went, "Okay, we get the point. We're not going to do a POC or a pilot. We're going to go for a rollout." But what they did instead for this organisation, instead of allowing it to be accessible to all employees across the organisation, they will use it for onboarding staff instead. The risk level is much lower. So sometimes when it comes to pilots, what you're actually doing is you are deploying either your entire product to a very small group of individuals to assess it, or you could take a small part of a larger project and deploy it to see whether that's going to work for them. And so when it comes to things like Lloyds, the approach was there. Instead of giving them the whole thing, we gave them just this tiny sliver. And then that was exposed to the entire organisation. And then afterwards, and then it started to build out. So as you think about pilots, you're also able to think about those two different methods. Is it giving the entire, but to something very small, to very limited time, limited individuals, or are you giving a small piece of the pie, just that little tiny nibble that gets them wanting the whole pie?
Actually, on that risk point, we found quite interestingly that the smaller ticket sizes tend not to want to have a trial. They want to just let something in quick. So if it's a few £1,000s, then they'll just want to use the platform. And if they don't like it, they've only kind of lost a couple of £1,000s. Whereas if it's a big ticket kind of enterprise contract, that's when the trials become more relevant and more kind of important, I'd say. Yeah. And equally, that risk thing sits, I think, on our side of the fence as well. It's kind of like, if I'm looking at a £250,000 contract, I'm more than happy to run a 3-month trial. If I'm looking at a £5,000 contract, there's no way I'm running a 3-month trial, like full stop.
Yeah.
And that kind of negotiation is key before deciding to actually run a trial with a customer.
And also, having an idea up front of what that relationship looks like afterwards. Because it can sometimes be quite shielded and quite guarded. And you're like, okay, well, what am I pitching for here? What does success look like? And imagine you run through the pilot and then you realize that actually, at the end of it was £5,000. Oh.
Yeah.
And there can be this little bit of difficulty sometimes trying to articulate and try and peel back the layers to go, well, actually, what does that look like? So sometimes given an idea, sometimes our clients will ask us to do a more full-size quotation. So they've got an idea of what life looks like afterwards, and that becomes key. Then we might do the proof of value or the pilot. But the key is then knowing that, okay, if this goes well, in your mind, what's the likelihood of it then turning into something afterwards?
Yeah. So we've got a few minutes left. I did promise that we'd take questions from the audience. I just wanted to hand over to you folks. Does anyone have anything to share or a question for our panelists?
I'm assured.
It's Emmanuel.
Yeah, that's fine. So, thanks for that, Haydn and Simeon. I think you've both touched on this kind of concept of the organisation you're doing a pilot with. They need to invest into the pilot as well. And I think, Haydn, you talked about specifically like having regular touch points. Mm-hmm. Kind of what shape and form does that take? So kind of, do you agree up front some terms and conditions? Appreciate, you want to be agile, you don't want to write lengthy contracts, but how do you make sure that the organisation you're working with is investing time and effort? Because, no one really values anything for free, if that makes sense. So, we often all subscribe up to things in our personal lives that we don't value. It's only when someone says, actually, I want something back, whether it's your time or your feedback or your comment, that's when we start taking things seriously. So how do you do that in a sort of like a startup environment?
Really depends on the specific client and the specific trial. So there's definitely I always tell kind of our salespeople, make sure you book in all the meetings, for example, at the start of the trial, so they're in the calendar and people are kind of committed to them. And I'm saying that knowing full well that a lot of clients won't turn up to them anyway, even if they're in the calendar. So there's no really kind of easy way to answer that. It comes down, again, to making sure that you only run trials with clients where you are willing to invest the time because you know they're going to close. If you're going to invest a lot of time into a trial where you think it's only kind of a 20% success rate, then you're going to lose out most of the time. And you need to just be able to identify the clients that you are confident will close within the next 3 months, and the ones who need a trial, really kind of focusing on those trials in particular. Outside of that, making it very clear on what the trial is, so time boxing it really helps, what the output of the trial is, so making sure at the end of the trial you have this output and whatever report that might be for the client. Usually it helps to tie that together with the sales conversation, so say, okay, well, what do you need to take internally to be able to buy this, and make sure that is the output from the trial. And then setting clear expectations around, okay, we're expecting a weekly call, we need half an hour of your time, this is what we're going to run through as an agenda for each one of those calls, is that okay? And getting that agreement kind of up front really does help.
Simeon, anything to add? Or
Yes, so really well covered. So I think one other bit is often sometimes the stakeholder may be an internal advocate, and sometimes what they're needing to do is build that business case. So if you understand what are the stakeholders looking for, those are essentially the questions that go in the report. So for us, it may have been down to how quickly someone can learn. It may have been, did people enjoy it? What was the engagement level? It might be, if it was related to something that was virtual reality, for example, we would be asking all of the questions that the senior stakeholders would have as potential issues and red flags. Do the individuals feel sick? Question would be, did you feel sick when you went into the experience, right? So we're actually trying to work out enough questions that will provide us with really positive feedback, and you can ask questions in the right way to get positive feedback. The other thing, though, is working out what will all those red flags be, and then making sure that when that report goes off to the senior stakeholder, that is there articulated as well. So your aim is really to overcome the objections, and that's what we're trying to do. And I think that another thing that we try to do when it comes to providing reports for the end client is just really try and format that in the right way. Can we get involved? Can we plan the conversation directly with the stakeholder as well? If we can get the meeting in with the next senior individual, that can really help to kind of solidify things as well.
and also run things in parallel. So whilst you're running the trial, do like a terms and conditions review alongside, do the negotiation for the financials either before or alongside it as well. And that way you're not doing kind of a trial and then still have another 2 or 3 stages before you actually have a signed contract. So if you try and do as much as you can in parallel, that usually helps kind of speed up the sales process as well.
I was going to ask for your biggest tip, but it sounds like that's quite a big tip. Do you have a big tip? One specific one in addition, Simeon?
No.
Brilliant. We probably have time for one more question, if there's one in the audience.
So, Haydn, you said at the beginning, like around pre-stage, you didn't have any funding closed or you didn't have the product, but you managed to get your first pilot client. So really keen to understand how you managed to get that without the product.
I smiled and begged pretty much for 2 months. It was a case of it was a real problem. I had met these clients one of whom came from my network as a consultant and the other one I'd met through an accelerator. And I knew that they had a real problem internally that they needed to solve, and they tried a lot of products to solve it. And it was a case of then being able to go to them and say, okay, we'll run a trial on this platform that we're in the middle of building. In order to build it, I need to raise investment. In order to raise that investment, I need to show there's a market here, and so I really need you to pay some money towards it. And it was £4,000 for a proof of concept, so it was well underneath the procurement threshold, which is another thing everyone should know. Most procurement teams and enterprises have a threshold of money, which the minute you go over, you have to do a terms review, a security review, and 100 other steps before they'll buy it. So if you slip underneath that procurement threshold, that usually works quite well. And then, managed to sell these 2 proof of concepts where I think both companies were like, well, it's a real problem, we've tried to solve it, and we haven't been able to. So we'll pay £4,000, and we had put a couple of terms in kind of the order form saying that if the product wasn't built by a certain date, we'd refund the £4,000. And if they ran the trial, and at the end of the trial they chose to buy the product, we'd discount the £4,000 off the full price of the product as well. So there was very little risk there for the customer, but it still gave us the ammunition we needed then to go to the investors and raise some investment. And that was quite a good kind of negotiation, I suppose, to have. And I'd just say be transparent. It's usually the people you're talking to do understand how difficult it is to raise investment and build a product. And if the problem is a real burning problem, they won't mind about that as long as you're not creating problems for them. So don't ask for £50,000 if you haven't built the product yet. Make sure you're kind of keeping it underneath that threshold.
And that's where sometimes you change your viewpoint to being more of a proof of concept. As a business, we were very used to selling things that we hadn't created before or didn't exist. For example, when we worked with ITV, both times we did the projects with them, actually I was showing them the shop window, right? And that's what I was, they knew it, okay, they didn't know it, right? But the proof of concept essentially was, okay, this is the picture, right? And we built it. And we created it. Even when we worked with Lloyds, some of the proof of concept was based on something that existed. But then they went, look, we trust you to then build and develop it out. For us as a bootstrap business, we depend on money coming from clients to even build something out in the first place. And so that's how we fund ourselves. Our clients actually pay for us to build and to make what we do. And sometimes that's as a proof of concept, and other times that's as a pilot. And it becomes, in that way, quite a useful way of doing business.
Brilliant. Well, thank you.
The only warning I'd add on to that is I have heard stories, and this has never happened to me, of other founders running proof of concepts to build products where the initial clients have then tried to take some of the IP ownership of that.
Yeah,
So be very wary, especially as a young founder who maybe doesn't come from a legal background, make sure that you do read through the contract very carefully. I think that's a lot less common nowadays. I haven't heard it happen in a while, but...
it's in the terms and conditions as standard that the IP, when you're creating something, belongs to the organization you're creating it for. So we made sure that when we did the project with Lloyds and ITV, we're like, look, what we're creating, we have the IP, we will own the IP. Also what we did is we made sure that we had enough background IP. So we did enough development first, and then we would go, actually, well, the percentage of work we've done is this. The only time that you would have any IP claim would be related to your logos being used, if you use it. So it's 100% correct that look out for those terms, because the businesses, what they would love is for you to build the product for them, and then you realize that actually they own it. And that would be not what you want. Yeah. There's my tip, based on your tip. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's a very, very good tip. Thank you both. That was fascinating, and really delighted to hear about your successes. Everyone, Haydn and Simeon.
Thank you.
And that's it. So thank you for joining, as I said, our second quarterly meetup of Cyber Lates. We'll be back in 2022 with the next round again in person. This recording tonight will be shared on our socials and on our website, so feel free to watch it back and hear the tip from Simeon, his last one, which obviously was a gem, and also distribute it to friends or anyone who's interested. What I would say is, for those of you who are new to our community or who wish to join our community, do go to our website, plexal.com/the-newsletter, sign up there. You'll see lots of relevant content and opportunities, including opportunities on our various accelerator and innovation programs that we're running, Lorca, Cyber Runway, and NCSC for startups, for which we're actually currently recruiting for startups around quite specific challenge areas. So do check out our website and that particular program if you're interested in engaging. We obviously talked about Tech London advocates and global tech advocates, so do reach out to myself, Diane, and obviously Steve as well, and we'll be delighted to connect you. But for now, that's all we have. Please do join us afterwards for networking drinks just outside in the park. Thank you.